The night was silent. The streets were empty. A single figure walked slowly, his steps heavy, his eyes lost. His name was Ahan. From a distance, he looked like any other young man, but inside him there was a storm no one could see. He stopped near a broken streetlight. The light flickered for a moment and then died, leaving him in shadows. He looked up at the sky. The stars were there, bright and endless, but for him, they felt far away, unreachable. The sky was alive, but his world was empty. Ahan's life had once been different. He had dreams. He had plans. He had the fire that makes people believe in tomorrow. But somewhere, between failures and betrayals, that fire had turned into smoke. What remained was a hollow silence. He closed his eyes for a moment. A thought whispered inside him. Is this all life is left for me? Just emptiness? Just a void? The void, that is what he called it. It was not just a darkness around him. It was a darkness inside. A feeling that nothing mattered anymore. A feeling that every step forward would only lead to another wall. He kept walking, though he did not know where. His hands were cold, but his heart was colder. People passed by him, but he felt invisible. Even when someone's shoulder brushed against him, it was as if he was not really there. The world had moved on without him. Ahan remembered a time when he had laughed easily, when he had believed in friendships, when he had thought that life was kind. But that boy was gone. What remained was a shell, a body carrying pain, and a mind drowning in questions with no answers. He reached an old bridge at the edge of the city. The wind there was sharp, cutting through his skin. He placed his hands on the cold metal railing and leaned forward, staring down. Below him, the water was dark and restless. For a moment, he wondered if the water could end it all, if it could swallow the void inside him, just as it swallowed everything else. His breath grew heavier, his eyes colder. But then, something strange happened. He felt a tear roll down his cheek. It surprised him. He had not cried in a long time. He thought he had no tears left. And yet, here it was, warm against his skin. He whispered to himself, "Why am I still crying? If I am empty, why does it still hurt?" The question stayed in his mind. It was small, but powerful. If he was truly broken, why did his heart still beat so painfully? Why did he still feel? The city lights flickered in the distance. Cars moved. People laughed somewhere far away, and the world continued to breathe. He, however, stood still, trapped between the wish to disappear and the strange pull to hold on a little longer. Ahan's story was not yet over. But in that moment, he did not know. All he knew was a way to the void and the silence of the night. He looked at his hands gripping the railing. They were trembling, weak, yet still holding. He realized something. Maybe the void had not won yet. Maybe a part of him was still fighting, even in silence. The narrator's voice echoes. What happens when life pushes a man into the deepest darkness? Will he surrender to the void, or will he find a reason to rise again? The scene closes with Ahan standing on that bridge, the night around him heavy, the water below him restless, and the question in his heart burning like a hidden flame. The story of resilience had not begun yet, but the silence before the storm had. The night on the bridge ended, but the darkness inside Ahan did not. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, yet the weight in his heart never left. It was not the kind of weight people could see. On the outside, he looked normal, just another face in the crowd. But inside, he carried shadows too heavy for anyone to imagine. The shadows came from his past. They were not ghosts of strangers, but the memories of people he once trusted. Friends who had promised to stand with him, but vanished when he needed them most. A family that believed in him once, but slowly lost their faith. And dreams, bright dreams, that broke into dust right before his eyes. Every time he tried to stand up, life seemed to push him back down. He would make plans, work hard, and give his best, but in the end, something always collapsed. Sometimes it was failure, sometimes betrayal, sometimes just cruel luck. Slowly, the world began to whisper, "He cannot do it. He will never rise." Ahan heard those whispers. At first, he ignored them, but after years of hearing the same words, they began to feel true. It was like poison. The more he tried to fight it, the deeper it sank. He walked through crowded markets, busy streets, noisy cafes, but he felt invisible. People laughed around him, but their laughter sounded distant, like echoes from another world. He wondered how they could smile so easily when his own heart felt like stone. At night, when the world was asleep, the shadows grew stronger. He would lie awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of his room. But the silence was not empty. It was loud. It carried voices from the past, voices of people who once told him he was not good enough, not strong enough, not worthy enough. Sometimes he would press his hands over his ears, hoping the voices would stop, but they were not outside. They were inside. The shadows had moved into his soul. One evening, he stood in front of a mirror. The face looking back at him felt strange. The eyes were dull, the smile had disappeared, and the skin looked tired. He asked himself, "Is this really me? Or am I just a stranger now?" He remembered the boy he once was, the boy full of fire, full of dreams, full of light. That boy had believed he could change the world. But now, the man in the mirror was only surviving, not living. He whispered to himself, "Maybe the world was right. Maybe I was never strong enough." The weight grew heavier each day. It was not just sadness anymore. It was a feeling of being trapped, like carrying an invisible cage everywhere he went. A cage made of memories, disappointments, and broken trust. Still, Ahan kept moving. He woke up, went out, came back, repeated the cycle. On the outside, life went on. But on the inside, he was sinking deeper into the void. And yet, in the middle of that pain, one truth remained. The shadows were heavy, but he was still breathing. The void was deep, but it had not swallowed him completely. The narrator's voice echoes. The heaviest battles are not fought in the world outside, but in the silence of one's own mind. Ahan's fight was not against people. His fight was against the shadows within. The story pauses at this point, leaving a question hanging in the air. How long can a man carry such weight before he breaks? Or will the weight itself awaken something inside him? Ahan did not know it yet, but the answer was waiting. Somewhere in the darkness, a small spark was about to appear. Ahan's nights were long, and his days felt endless. The shadows had grown so heavy that even breathing seemed like a task. He had learned to move through life quietly, as if he was only a ghost passing through. But fate has its own way of writing stories, and sometimes, even in the deepest darkness, a small spark appears. It happened on a rainy evening. The sky was gray, and the streets were wet with puddles. Ahan walked without an umbrella, his clothes soaked, his hair dripping. He did not care. The rain outside matched the storm inside him. As he passed by a small shop, he heard the soft sound of laughter. He turned his head slightly. Inside, a little girl was standing at the counter. She wore old clothes, her hair tied messily, but her smile was bright, so bright it lit the tiny shop more than the dim yellow bulbs above her head. She was holding a balloon, red and round, but the string slipped from her hands. The balloon flew out of the door, carried by the wind. The girl gasped and ran after it. Without thinking, Ahan's feet moved. He reached out and caught the balloon just before it floated into the busy street. For a second, he stared at it, the bright red color standing out against the gray world. It was such a simple thing, yet it felt alive, warm, different from the emptiness around him. The girl ran up to him, her small face glowing with relief. "Thank you," she said with a wide smile, her eyes shining. Ahan hesitated. He wanted to say something, but the words were stuck. Finally, he just nodded and handed the balloon back. The girl's smile grew even brighter as she hugged it close. Then she whispered, "You're kind." 2 small words. That was all, but they struck his heart like lightning. Kind. It had been so long since anyone had called him that. So long since anyone had looked at him and seen something good instead of failure or weakness. For the rest of the evening, those words echoed in his mind. "You're kind." They were simple, innocent, but powerful. It was as if, for the first time in years, someone had reminded him that he was still human, that the void had not stolen everything from him. That night, lying in bed, Ahan could not sleep. He thought of the girl's smile, of the way her small voice carried warmth in a world that had grown so cold for him. It was a small moment, but it refused to fade. And then another memory returned. His mother's voice from long ago, when he was a child. No matter how dark life becomes, one small light can guide you through. Ahan felt something stir inside him. It was not hope, not yet, but it was a spark, a reminder that he was still capable of feeling, of caring, of noticing life around him. The next day, when he woke up, the shadows were still there, but they were not as heavy. Somewhere inside, that spark glowed faintly, like a candle in a storm. He began to notice little things again. The way the sun broke through the clouds after rain. The sound of birds calling in the morning. The smell of tea from a street vendor. Tiny details he had once ignored. Now, they whispered to him, reminding him that the world still held fragments of beauty. But with beauty came fear. What if the spark went out again? What if the void swallowed it whole? The thought haunted him. Still, he held on, because for the first time in years, he had something to hold on to. The narrator's voice echoes. Sometimes it is not a great miracle that saves a soul. Sometimes it is a smile, a word, or a moment so small that the world does not notice. But for the one lost in darkness, it becomes everything. Ahan did not know where the spark would lead him. But he knew one thing. He was not ready to give up yet. Not completely. Not while that little flame still lived inside his heart. And so, the journey continued. The void was still there. But now, so was the spark. The story closes with Ahan standing once again at the bridge. The same bridge where he had once thought to surrender. But this time, when he looked at the water, he did not only see darkness. He also saw the reflection of a faint light, the spark that had returned. The spark inside Ahan was small, fragile, almost like a candle in the wind. But even a candle can challenge the dark. For the first time in years, he felt something that was not pain. It was a faint pull of life. And with that pull came a decision. He would try, even if trying broke him again. The road was not easy. In fact, it was harder than he imagined. The void inside him did not simply disappear. It fought back. Every morning when he opened his eyes, the shadows whispered, "Why get up? Why try? You will only fail again." But this time, Ahan answered the voices, even if his voice was weak, "Because I am still here." He began with small steps, waking up earlier, forcing himself to walk outside, drinking water, eating meals, even when he had no appetite. To anyone else, these were ordinary actions, but for Ahan, they were victories. Each small act was proof that the void had not won. Still, the struggle was heavy. There were nights when he sat by the window, staring at the stars, feeling the weight of his loneliness pressing on his chest. Days would come without warning, and he hated himself for crying. Yet even then, he reminded himself, "I am still breathing. I am still alive." Slowly, he pushed himself further. He picked up a notebook and began to write. Not poetry, not stories, just thoughts, broken sentences, pieces of his heart spilled on paper. The words were messy, but they were his. Each page felt like lifting a stone off his chest. He started running too. At first, only a few minutes before his lungs burned and his legs ached. But he kept running every day, pushing himself a little more. The pain in his muscles was real, but it was better than the pain in his silence. Every drop of sweat felt like a rebellion against the void. But the world did not make it easy. People still doubted him. Some laughed at his efforts, saying, "He is wasting his time. He will never change." Those words cut deep, reopening old wounds. Yet Ahan remembered the little girl with the balloon. He remembered her smile and her voice. "You're kind." He held on to that memory like a shield. For the first time, someone's words gave him strength instead of pain. He also remembered his mother's voice. "One small light can guide you through." And so, he kept moving. There were failures. Yes, there were days when he slipped back into the darkness. Days when the void almost swallowed him whole. But every time, he fought his way back, sometimes crawling, sometimes stumbling, but never stopping. His scars became his teachers. Every mistake reminded him of his strength. Every failure showed him that he could stand again. One evening, while running on the same bridge where he had once thought to surrender, Ahan stopped to catch his breath. He looked out at the water below. It was the same water, the same restless waves, but he felt different. This time, He was not looking for escape. He was looking at proof that he had survived. For the first time, he whispered to himself, "I will not break. Not again." The narrator's voice echoes, "Strength is not built in one day. It is built in every small choice, every step taken against the weight of fear, every tear turned into fire." Ahan's rise was not sudden. It was slow, painful, and full of scars. But that is what made it real. He was not free of the void yet. The shadows were still there, waiting. But Ahan had something now that the void could not destroy: resilience. The will to rise again, no matter how many times he fell. The story closes with Ahan standing on the bridge once more. The night wind blows across his face, but instead of feeling cold, he feels alive. His heart is still heavy, his journey unfinished, but his eyes shine with a new light. And in that moment, one truth becomes clear. He was no longer just surviving. He was fighting. The journey had been long, painful, and full of battles that no one else could see. Ahan had faced the weight of shadows, the silence of nights, and the cruelty of whispers that told him he was not enough. Yet here he was, still breathing, still standing. The void inside him was not gone. He knew it might never disappear completely. But something had changed. He had learned to live with it, to rise against it, to shine in spite of it. The void was no longer his master. One morning, he stood at the top of a hill outside the city. The sky was painted with shades of gold as the sun rose slowly, pushing back the darkness of the night. For a long time, Ahan just stood there, watching. The warmth of the sun touched his skin, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to smile. It was not a perfect smile. It carried scars, sadness, and pain. But it was real, and it was his. He thought back to the little girl with the red balloon, to his mother's voice, to the countless nights he had survived. Each memory was a thread, and together they had woven a net strong enough to catch him whenever he fell. He whispered softly, "I did not escape the void. I walked through it." That was the truth. His story was not about running away from pain. It was about learning to rise with it, to accept that darkness existed, but so did light, to accept that scars remained, but they could be turned into strength. Ahan's days slowly began to fill with meaning again. He started helping people, small acts, nothing grand, carrying groceries for an old man, talking kindly to strangers, writing words that others could read and feel less alone. Every act reminded him of something powerful. The strength he had found was not only for himself, it was also for those still trapped in their own voids. He realized that resilience was not about becoming unbreakable. It was about being broken and still choosing to stand. Again and again, the world had once told him he was weak. Now, he understood true strength was hidden in those who kept going even when no one believed in them. One evening, Ahan returned to the bridge where his journey had begun, the same place where he had once leaned over the railing, wondering if the water below would end his pain. But this time, he did not see darkness. He saw reflection. The water mirrored the sky, glowing with the colors of sunset. He leaned on the railing again, but instead of despair, he felt peace. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The wind carried whispers of the past, but they no longer controlled him. The void was still inside him, but it was no longer endless. He had filled it with sparks of kindness, hope, and resilience. The narrator's voice echoes, "Beyond the void is not a place of perfection. It is not a life without pain or scars. Beyond the void is a heart that refuses to give up, a spirit that continues to rise, a soul that learns to shine even in darkness." Ahan opened his eyes and looked forward. The city lights began to glow in the distance. Life was waiting. Challenges were waiting. But he was ready. The boy who once thought he was finished had become the man who understood resilience. And with a quiet smile, he whispered to himself, "The void did not win." The story ends not with escape, but with strength, not with a perfect ending, but with a new beginning, a reminder that as long as the human spirit breathes, no void, no matter how deep, can never truly win.